Hello, I'm Bob Ackerman, the editor-in-chief of Signal Magazine, and welcome to our Signal Media Executive Interview. Our guest today is Zach Conover, General Manager, AKIMA subsidiaries, TrueStone, LynxNet, and Aperture Federal. Zach, welcome.
Thank you for having me here, Bob.
Zach, supply chains are a major topic of discussion these days, and capped off with the president signing an executive order for a 100-day review of our nation's supply chain. What are the major supply chain issues you see, both COVID-oriented and more generally?
So, Bob, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about supply chains. For those of us who have kind of been in this business, been around this type of environment, the signing of the executive order by the administration is a really good sign. And it's a nice move. It's long term. I mean, the challenges that they're trying to solve are much bigger. Whereas what we're trying to focus on from my side is supply chain issues and how do you solve them today, kind of in real time. So I don't think it's a surprise to anybody that there are supply chain challenges. You know, the world has gone to a just-in-time manufacturing. We are a global economy, and there's nothing that you buy or use these days that doesn't have components that are sourced from all over the world. You know, whether it's the food that you eat or the cell phone that you use or the computers that we're talking on, you've got supply chain issues. So I think that COVID here recently has just kind of enabled an opportunity to highlight the weaknesses in the supply chain, and has really shown us as a country and a lot of different companies how dependent we are on supply chains that we really don't have a whole lot of control over. And it's interesting, so most of the work that we do for my company is we're really focused in the DoD market space. I mean, we work with the federal government in general, but tends to be DoD. 30 years ago, DoD had the ability to really kind of drive production. What they came up with and what they wanted, they could get, as well as things were not nearly as complicated as the systems we're dealing with today. Today, you have no less complexity on the needs and requirements and the speed that the warfighter needs a solution. But what you've got is DoD no longer is in the driver's seat. The federal government may be the largest customer in the world, but as an individual customer, but we pale in comparison to the consumer market space. So when you start talking about the underlying component or materials level supplies, not the where can I get an iPhone, but where can I get capacitors and resistors and steel and aluminum. We don't drive that as a country, as our government doesn't drive that. What resistors happen to be available are much more dependent upon what does Dell decide to put in their computer, or what does Apple or Google or Ford decide to use in their products. So that's not to say that the supplies aren't out there, and that the parts that we want to use to develop whatever the solution is for the warfighter aren't available. But it does mean that there's another level of complexity when you go to actually kind of do the production and do the build. So a great example that we've dealt with here recently was we were working with the Army, and they handed us a kind of a build to print type of circuit board. So they'd done the work, they designed the circuit board, and they needed somebody who had the ability to get it through the production cycle, get it through the testing cycle. And so we took it and we looked at it, and we came back in, and it was something that was just crazy. It was like 9-month lead time for a fairly simple circuit board. That's not acceptable really in our line of work, because this is a warfighter needs. We need to get it out to the folks that need this as quickly as possible. So we brought in our engineers, we brought in our supply chain experts, and we tore apart the board, figuratively, looking through all the parts. And what we were able to drill down to was that there was one capacitor that was spec'd on the board that there was a supply chain issue with. It wasn't that capacitor was uber unique and something you couldn't get elsewhere. But if you had specified yourself down to a specific company, a specific component, you end up with problems. So we were able to work back through with DoD and with the Army to get that specific component changed out, and suddenly your production timeframes drop from 9 months to 4 weeks. And so it can have, as simple as a single capacitor on a single board can have that level of impact on your production cycles. So it takes the engineer with the idea who understands what they're trying to accomplish. It takes the production expertise, and it takes a supply chain view to be able to take these concepts and the need and get it into a state where you can get it out to the warfighter or the user in a timely fashion. So I think that COVID is interesting, and that we had a lot of impact early on. I think everybody can relate to the lack of toilet paper around the country. But frankly, for a lot of the types of stuff that we're dealing with, there was some level of on-the-shelf stock. And so, we're almost a year into this. And so what you're starting to see now is that the staffing issues that these manufacturers at I'll call it kind of the component or base level supply, you're starting to see their supplies are dwindling, and they're not quite as able to keep up. And so you're seeing entire plants shutting down production for vehicles because they can't get basic resistors, capacitors, those types of components. So there's a real impact to this.
COVID has changed the way we work, most definitely. This also has impacted the relationship between government and its contractors. How did your company respond to this challenge?
Rapidly. So I'm quite proud to be able to stand here and say that we never slowed down, and we were able to keep people engaged and supporting our customers the entire time. We never stopped and stopped providing the service to the government. But it's interesting, right? I mean, so some of these jobs that we do can be done remotely, but some of these jobs also require people to be on site. If you need to be able to get to a classified computer network, that's not something that you're just going to set up in your kitchen at home in a remote work environment. We have people, we run prototype production where you can't just bring the CNC machine or the lathe home with you. You're going to have to show up to work. So we did a lot of work to be able to follow the CDC guidelines and the social distancing requirements, and to make it a very safe environment. But you saw a lot of moving around of schedules, and a lot of kind of changes to locations. Reorganizing layouts in offices, reorganizing layouts in production facilities to be able to maintain. It's really kind of the agility and nimbleness of the relationship between the government and us, our customers, that allows us to be able to do these things. A great example of where we were able to kind of turn on a dime to be able to help the government. If you guys remember, I guess it's almost about a year ago right now. It was the whole, Matt. Yes, we need masks. No, we don't need masks. And then suddenly it was yes, we need masks, and we need lots of masks, and everybody needed a mask. We have our production facility down in Panama City. We work with the Naval Surface Warfare Center down there. They came to us and said, "Hey, can you help?" And we took a machine manufacturing environment, and within 36 hours, we had it completely changed around to produce masks for all of the DoD and government folks on site. So we were able to source material, change processes, break out different equipment, and get a full production line up and going inside of 36 hours.
Would you say that's indicative of the changing nature of the supply chain resulting from COVID?
I think it's indicative of the dynamic environment that we're seeing here today. I mean, I think that the supply chain itself is always going to be dynamic. I think that COVID is just kind of showing us really where our weak spots are, and hopefully we'll be able to kind of learn from the identification of these kind of weak areas. It's not necessarily, weak might be too harsh a term. Areas where we have over reliance on a single source, or we don't have choices, and when you have lack of choice, that gives you increased risk. And so I think COVID is just really highlighting what's been going on for a long time that we've just been kind of rolling with.
I'd like to enlarge upon that a little bit, because the military is turning to commercial technologies to an increasing degree. Yet it must continue to use legacy systems and government off-the-shelf systems. What are the key factors in incorporating commercial and government technologies for them to be able to work together effectively?
So great question, and one that you can talk about for a long time. So I'll try and distill down my answer here, and not just kind of wander off into the wilderness, if you will. But COTS has been the kind of the end all be all for a long time. I mean, the goal is, let's be able to just go into Home Depot or Walmart or Dell or wherever and just buy what's on the shelf that could really help speed technology to the warfighter, that could really help reduce costs and save a lot of money. However, that comes as no shock to anybody. Our customers, the soldiers, the sailors that are out there, especially the ones on the front lines, they live and work in a slightly different environment than we do. That laptop that you and I are using right now is perfectly fine for our job. Probably isn't going to get the job done, when I put it in the hands of one of my guys flying in a helicopter to the top of a mountaintop in Alaska to do maintenance. They're just living in a different environment. So the solution there is not to say, no, we can't use COTS. It's got to be a government solution. The solution really comes down to relationships, and understanding and communication between the government and the contractor, and making sure that we all understand the risk that's involved. Because there are some things where you can accept risk. It's going to be okay if that widget or box breaks during a mission. There's going to be other areas where if that thing breaks, the entire mission is going to be compromised. And so understanding the level of risk, understanding the actual environment where systems are going to be used, really drive the COTS versus GOTS decision. And so now that what you end up with is a hybrid, right? You end up with a hybrid of COTS and GOTS stuff that's out there, and then you've got to make it talk to each other, because invariably, every engineer in DoD and the government has always gone in when they've made something, they designed it, and they have a specified life cycle for it, and you set up supply chains, and it's going to work. It's going to be great. Well, I can tell you that almost 100% of government systems will be used well past their life cycle, well past what the supply chains were ever set up to manage. I remember being in the Coast Guard running configuration management for the North American Loran system, and it was in 2004. I was trying to source vacuum tubes, from around the world. It's like, yeah, these transmitters that were built and installed 30, 40 years ago were never intended to be managed. And you see that all the time today. We do a lot of work with the Navy, a lot in the communication side, a lot in the navigation side. And that's where you really see a lot of interface coming between government systems and commercial systems. The commercial, you start talking about like commercial fishermen, their radars, some of those systems. Those are great systems, completely meet the Navy's requirement. But then they need to be able to interface and talk into a Navy network. They need to be able to interface and talk with other Navy Navy approved components or technology. So understanding the interfaces and getting them to talk to each other, that's where it kind of the secret sauce is made, if you will. You know, over time, as technology continues to improve, the protocols that are used to be able to transmit information between, you know, a radar and a display and a radio, those things evolve. And so as you're fixing and replacing different components along the way, inserting basically think of them as a translator in between those becomes important. Also, the ability to go back and kind of re-engineer and rebuild and keep systems going where those are the best system to get the job done. That takes a lot of work on the engineer and the technician side, but a lot of work engaging with small prototype type level manufacturing to be able to keep getting those types of components. You know, we work with the Navy on some high-speed fleet broadband systems. So these are systems that have been out in the fleet for a long, long time. And so the components that you have inside them, they just don't make anymore. And so our ability to be able to completely rebuild and reverse engineer and get that system back up and running is key to be able to keep the communications going between ships. But you know, that's an IT example, but you also see it, you know, we're down in Panama City rebuilding winches. You know, these are hydraulic winches that operate out of helicopters, and they've been in service for decades. And so the components and the parts that are in there are not available anymore. And so every time something breaks, we actually have to work with our design engineers to completely develop that part from the ground up, and then go have it fabricated by our machinists, and then be able to keep these systems going for the Navy. So you see that kind of across the board, if you will.
Well, that really leads into the whole issue of government acquisition. When you have government acquisition in formal programs, change-driven overruns occur, and the process generally takes too long to accommodate today's rapidly changing technology. So for starters, how can we streamline the process?
So government acquisition, another meaty topic that we could get a lot of folks with a lot of opinions to talk about. Change-driven overruns. Change is the key part of that statement there. Change causes delays. It causes costs to change. It causes the skill sets that you need to shift. How do you avoid that? How do you streamline this? It's really, to me, it's about the communication back and forth between the customer and the contractor, and really it gets a little bit more complicated than that, because it's really a triangle. Because on one corner you've got the contractor who's trying to make sure that we provide a good service, and more importantly, we're providing the right service or the right component, or we're providing the right thing. On the other side, you really got two entities that you're trying to balance. You've got the contracting shop, that's where you got your contracting officers and your contracting specialists, and they're making sure that we're following all of the right rules and we're following all of the right requirements. But what I will say is that the other piece that is kind of in there is the actual customer. You know, it's the government engineer, it's the operator, it's the person that has the actual problem. And so getting the communication amongst all three is critical and key. And there's a lot of fear. There's a lot of fear right now with government contracting folks, because everybody is petrified of having to deal with a protest on a proposal. They're petrified that they're going to say the wrong thing and that's going to taint the entire acquisition process. And so unfortunately, the kind of easy button that gets pressed a lot of times is that we just stop talking. The government is uncomfortable having kind of detailed, deep dive discussions that would really lay out what we're trying to accomplish. what we're trying to get done. So it's creating that kind of trusted partner relationship, and that trusted partner term gets tossed around a lot, but it's creating that relationship, understanding the rules, because you don't want to. I mean, you don't want to have a problem with the contracting side of this. You want this to go smoothly, but the FAR and the process itself is designed, especially early on, to be able to have good, open, clear conversations so that you can really drill down to what is it that we really are trying to do here. And so that's where we focus. I mean, the best example, I mean, we have a contract with the Army where they came to us and they sent us a stack of drawings and said, hey, go build this. Well, we ended up cycling back and forth with them several times, suggesting different contracting approaches, suggesting different, drilling down to make sure that we understood exactly what they were looking for, exactly how they needed it delivered. And at the end of that, we ended up with a really clear understanding of what they needed, which meant that as soon as the ink wasn't even dried on the piece of paper, we were already off and running, and everybody was moving in the same direction, and we had a clear set of expectations going forward. I mean, it sounds like a non-answer, right? It's like, how do you make this work? You talk to each other. It's like, no kidding. The customer should talk to the contractor. Yes, we should do that. But it also is, I like sports a lot, and it's the blocking and tackling. You've got to just, you don't need to reinvent how to tackle somebody. You just need to do it consistently every time, and you just need to work hard at it day in and day out. That's really where I see the us kind of adapting to the new issues. And if you do it right, you can get technology into the warfighter's hands quickly and on time to be able to meet their demand.
Let me take a side trip here on a question that relates directly to what you've said, but constitutes, I think, a deeper dive. The private sector right now is roaring full speed ahead with new communications technologies. There are two schools of thoughts on how government should take advantage of that. One is that they work with the private sector from the get-go to help them develop systems that will easily adapt to military needs. And the other is they wait to see what the private sector comes out with, and then they work to adapt it. Now, one or the other would be better suited for particular capabilities. But in general, which of those two do you see becoming more prominent as we go into a more infocentric future?
So that's not an easy question, but I'll take a stab at it. So this is the kind of the world according to Zach here. I personally think that that letting the private sector run full speed ahead with their communications and the development that they're doing, and then trying to adapt them on the flip side back to the DoD needs, I think is the best solution for all parties involved. That there will be cases and there will be environments that's just not possible. When you're operating in caves, when you're operating in urban canyons, when you're operating under triple canopy jungles, there are a lot of communication challenges that occur, and so that I'm not sure that the commercial side will ever really deal with, simply because the market size is not necessarily there to encourage them to kind of get it done. But I think that in general, letting the commercial side run with it, let DoD focus on the areas where they have a really special, unique need that the commercial side won't solve. That's the approach that I think is probably best.
Okay. So, how do you see your relationship with government customers evolving in the future?
That is probably the hardest question you've asked all day. So far we've asked about supply chains and the FAR and contracting and how to work. How do we see our relationship with the government evolving? Again, we're dedicated, from our perspective to manufacturing and prototyping and advanced systems engineering. So we're bringing all of the folks to bear that on our team. So we're building that team, but it becomes, okay, how do you get to go talk to the customer? I mean, the last couple of questions, I've really emphasized the need for discussions, the need for that relationship. This is where COVID is really, I don't want to say throwing a wrench in it, but is really exacerbating an already challenging situation. There's never enough time in the day. There's never enough time to do all the communication and outreach and talking that I think either the government or the contractors would like to have. But it is trying to figure that out. We're a year into COVID. I think everybody is still riding the wave of, they had customers that they already had relationships with, they're supporting their customers. And so they're able to kind of just survive on that. The real question is, how do you create a relationship that's beyond just, hey, here I am talking to you, but a relationship where you trust me. You trust me enough to be able to ask the difficult question, and I trust you enough to be able to stumble and work through the answer. And how do I create that relationship? It's hard enough when I was able to travel and I could somehow figure out how to get through the front gate of whatever base you happen to be at and get into a room with you. That was still hard. Now I have to do it over email. I have to do it over a Teams meeting or a Zoom meeting, which maybe for my kids, I mean, my kids seem to have all the friends in the world and they're committed. I mean, oh my goodness, they talk to somebody on Teams, that's their best friend for life. I'm from a different generation. I'm a handshake type of person. I'm sit down and look you in the eye and kind of build that personal relationship. How we do that moving forward, I don't know that anybody has a good answer to that. I think we've got some answers that help us kind of carry through right now. But we're trying. I mean, so a great example of one area that we're trying to make this happen. One of my sister companies, Lori Thomas and Rivertech, they happen to have the Oasis contract. And so they just did an online moderated panel, and they opened it up to all of industry and government and said, come on in, we'll talk to you about this subject. We'll talk to you about what we've got going on. We're happy to share. And so I think that you're going to see kind of more of those types of examples to try and keep that, leaning forward in the straps, if you will, to develop those relationships. But it's going to be hard. And I don't know that anybody has an absolute answer for that today.
Okay. Well, Zach, I want to thank you for your insight and observations. To the audience, I want to thank you for viewing. This has been a Signal Media Executive Video. Good day.